My coworker took credit for my project, so I took credit for his promotion. Wesley Garrett presented my client retention algorithm to the executive board on a Wednesday morning while I sat in a different building training new hires on outdated software. I found out because my phone lit up with a Slack message from my friend in accounting. Why is Wesley presenting the Aurora project? I stared at the screen for 10 seconds before my hands started shaking. The Aurora project was mine. 18 months of work, nights and weekends. I'd built the entire algorithm from scratch, designed the interface, ran the pilot program with 3 major clients, and documented a 38% increase in retention rates. Wesley had done nothing except sit in 2 meetings where I'd presented progress updates. He'd asked maybe 5 questions total, and now he was upstairs presenting my work to the people who decided promotions. I walked out of the training session without explanation and took the elevator to the executive floor. Security stopped me at the glass doors. "Do you have clearance for this floor?" I didn't. I stood there watching through the glass as Wesley pointed at slides I'd created, graphs I'd generated, projections I'd calculated. The executives were nodding, leaning forward, clearly impressed. My boss, Patricia Vance, sat at the head of the table looking proud. Wesley had worn his expensive suit, the navy one that made him look competent and trustworthy. He was gesturing confidently, owning every word. I watched for 11 minutes before security asked me to leave. I went back downstairs, finished the training session on autopilot, and spent my lunch break in my car trying not to scream. The email arrived at 3:47 that afternoon. Subject line: "Congratulations, team." Patricia had sent it to the entire department. "I'm thrilled to announce that Wesley Garrett's innovative client retention project has received enthusiastic approval from our executive leadership team. His forward-thinking approach and dedication to excellence exemplify the kind of initiative we value at this company. Wesley will be leading the implementation phase and has been selected for our Senior Leadership Development Program. Please join me in congratulating him on this well-deserved recognition." I read it 4 times. My name appeared nowhere. Not even a mention of collaboration or team effort. Wesley had erased me completely. The replies started immediately. Dozens of people congratulating Wesley, praising his innovation, calling him a rising star. I wanted to reply to all and explain the truth, but I knew how that would look. Bitter, jealous, unprofessional. Wesley stopped by my desk at 4:15 carrying a coffee from the expensive place downstairs. He set it in front of me with a smile. "Thought you might need this. I know you've been working hard on those training sessions." I looked at the coffee, then at him. He was still wearing the navy suit, still radiating fake humility. "I saw the email," I said quietly. His smile didn't falter. "Yeah, pretty exciting stuff. Patricia really loved the presentation." Not my presentation, the presentation, like it had materialized from the universe. "Wesley, that was my project. I built that algorithm. I ran the pilot program." He tilted his head with manufactured concern. "I think you're confused, Simone. You did some preliminary research, sure, but I developed the actual strategy and implementation plan. That's what the executives cared about." My preliminary research was the entire foundation. My strategy was what he'd presented. But he said it with such conviction that for a moment I questioned my own memory. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed replaying every conversation, every meeting, every email exchange. The Aurora project had started because I'd noticed a pattern in client departure data 18 months ago. I'd written a proposal, presented it to Patricia, and gotten approval to develop it. Wesley had been assigned to provide strategic input, which meant he attended occasional meetings and contributed nothing substantive. But he'd been in the room, he'd heard my presentations, he'd seen my work, and apparently he'd decided it was his. At 2 a.m. I got up and opened my laptop. I started going through my files, my emails, my documentation. Everything was there, time-stamped, detailed, proof of every hour I'd worked, every decision I'd made, every result I'd achieved. I started building a folder, evidence, because if I was going to fight this, I needed to be able to prove what happened. Thursday morning, I requested a meeting with Patricia. Her assistant scheduled me for the following Wednesday, 6 days away. "She's quite busy with the Aurora implementation planning," the assistant explained. I wanted to say that I should be the one doing that planning, but I nodded and accepted the appointment. Wesley spent Thursday being congratulated by everyone in the office. People kept stopping by his desk, shaking his hand, telling him how brilliant the project was. He accepted every compliment with false modesty. It was really a team effort, he'd say, and then name 3 people who'd had nothing to do with it. He never mentioned me. By Friday afternoon, he'd been moved to a bigger office on the 3rd floor. The Senior Leadership Development Program came with a raise, a better title, and direct access to the executive team. Everything I should have received. I spent the weekend documenting everything. Not just the Aurora project, but every interaction I'd had with Wesley over the 3 years we'd worked together. Patterns emerged that I'd been too busy to notice before. The Jameson proposal last year that I'd drafted and he'd presented to Patricia as a collaboration, taking equal credit for my solo work. The client presentation 8 months ago where he'd used my slides without attribution and then accepted praise for the quality of the materials. The quarterly strategy memo I'd written that he'd forwarded to upper management with minor edits and his name at the top. This wasn't the first time. It was just the biggest, most blatant theft. and I'd let the smaller ones slide because I didn't want to seem difficult or territorial. That had been a mistake. Wesley had learned he could take from me without consequence, so he'd escalated. Monday morning, I arrived at work with a flash drive containing 47 pages of documentation. Emails, file timestamps, meeting notes, project drafts with my name and metadata attached. Everything organized chronologically with explanatory notes. I'd spent 12 hours on Sunday building this file, and it was airtight. But I didn't go straight to Patricia's office or HR. I'd learned something important over the weekend while researching workplace credit theft. Coming forward as a victim often backfired. People perceived you as bitter or vindictive. The person who stole credit was usually charismatic and well-liked, while the actual worker was quieter and less visible. The thief's version of events was already established. To win, I needed more than proof. I needed strategy. I needed Wesley to expose himself. The Wednesday meeting with Patricia lasted 8 minutes. I'd prepared a careful presentation of facts, but she cut me off after 90 seconds. Simone, I understand you're disappointed that you weren't mentioned in the announcement, but the reality is that Wesley drove this project forward. You did important groundwork, absolutely, but he's the one who synthesized everything into a cohesive strategy that resonated with leadership. I opened my folder of documentation. She held up her hand. I don't need to see a file of emails. I was there for the key meetings. I know who contributed what. Wesley showed initiative and leadership. Those are the qualities we promote. I tried again. Patricia, I can prove that every element of that presentation was my work. She smiled tightly. This conversation is veering into territory that concerns me. Attempting to undermine a colleague's success isn't a good look. I'd suggest you focus on your own projects and future opportunities. The meeting was over. I'd been warned. I walked out of Patricia's office understanding 3 things clearly. First, she knew Wesley had stolen my work and didn't care. Second, she'd chosen him for political reasons I didn't fully understand yet. Third, fighting this through official channels would destroy my career while leaving Wesley untouched. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed to protect people like Wesley and dispose of people like me. I went back to my desk and pulled up Wesley's calendar. He'd synced it to the department's shared system, probably to look important and busy. I started studying his schedule, his meetings, his patterns. If Patricia wouldn't listen to me, I'd find someone who would, and I'd make sure when I did the evidence was so overwhelming that ignoring it would be impossible. I needed Wesley to get comfortable, to get arrogant, to make mistakes. The Senior Leadership Development Program required participants to complete a capstone project that demonstrated strategic thinking and innovation. Wesley's topic, announced in an email Friday afternoon, was expanding the Aurora algorithm to predict client needs before they arose. Proactive retention instead of reactive. It was actually a brilliant next phase, one I'd outlined in my original proposal 18 months ago. Wesley was still mining my work, taking the roadmap I'd created and presenting it as his vision. The capstone would be presented to the CEO and board of directors in 3 months. If successful, it typically led to a VP promotion. Wesley was using my stolen project to launch himself into executive leadership, and everyone was helping him do it. Patricia assigned him a team of 5 analysts to support the capstone work. I wasn't on the team. I was back training new hires and handling administrative tasks. I started staying late at the office, working after everyone left. Not on my assigned tasks, on something else. I built a detailed presentation documenting Wesley's pattern of credit theft, not just with me, but with 3 other colleagues whose work he'd appropriated over the past 2 years. I interviewed them carefully during coffee breaks and lunch meetings, asking casual questions about past projects. They'd all noticed but said nothing. One woman, Keisha Williams, had actually left the company 6 months ago after Wesley took credit for her supply chain optimization work. She'd complained to HR and been told she was being territorial and uncooperative. I found her on LinkedIn and we talked for 90 minutes over video chat. She still had documentation. She was willing to provide testimony if needed. The pattern was undeniable once you looked for it. Wesley was a professional credit thief who'd built his entire career on other people's work. But I still needed more. I needed something that would force the company to act, something they couldn't dismiss or minimize. I found it in the code. The Aurora algorithm had my digital fingerprints embedded throughout, comments and notations in my coding style, variable names that referenced private jokes or personal preferences. I'd built it on my own laptop before transferring it to company servers, and the original files still existed on my personal machine with timestamps proving I'd created everything months before Wesley claimed to have developed the strategy. But more importantly, I'd deliberately built in a backdoor, a small piece of code that logged every access, every modification, every person who touched the algorithm. It was standard practice for protecting proprietary work, and completely legal. And according to those logs, Wesley had never accessed the actual algorithm until after I'd completed it. He'd viewed the finished product, copied it, and claimed ownership. But he'd never written a single line of code. I spent 3 weeks building my case in absolute secrecy. I documented everything, compiled testimony from former colleagues, generated reports from the algorithm's access logs, and created a timeline that proved conclusively Wesley had stolen not just the Aurora project, but multiple projects over several years. The evidence was devastating. But I still didn't take it to Patricia or HR. They'd already shown their hand. Instead, I looked up the organizational chart and found someone Patricia reported to. Regional Director Amanda Sutherland, based in our Boston office. She had a reputation for being data-driven and having zero tolerance for ethical violations. She'd fired 3 executives last year for misrepresenting sales figures. She was exactly who I needed. But I couldn't just email her documentation. That would look like circumventing the chain of command, and Patricia would frame me as a troublemaker. I needed Amanda to discover the problem herself. The annual leadership conference was scheduled for mid-October in Boston. 300 people from across the region, including all senior leadership and the participants in the development program. Wesley would be there, presenting his capstone progress to an audience that included Amanda Sutherland and the CEO. I requested to attend the conference, claiming I wanted professional development opportunities. Patricia approved it, probably because she didn't think I was a threat anymore. I'd been quiet for weeks, doing my job without complaint. She thought I'd accepted my place. I booked my flight and hotel room and prepared for what would either be career suicide or vindication. There was no middle ground anymore. I was going to expose Wesley in front of everyone who mattered, and the fallout would either destroy him or destroy me. I'd made peace with both possibilities. The leadership conference opened on a Thursday morning with a keynote from the CEO about innovation and integrity. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Wesley was scheduled to present his capstone Friday afternoon, prime time slot, right before the closing reception. I attended every session Thursday and Friday morning, networking with people from other offices, making myself visible and professional. I had lunch with Amanda Sutherland's executive assistant, and mentioned casually that I was excited to see the Aurora algorithm presentation, since I'd done some early research on client retention patterns. The assistant was friendly and talkative, complaining about how busy Amanda's schedule was, how many presentations she had to review. I sympathized and said nothing else, just planted the seed. Wesley was riding high, holding court at the hotel bar Thursday night, accepting congratulations for work he hadn't done. I watched from across the room, drinking water, waiting. Friday afternoon arrived. The conference room was packed with 200 people, including Amanda Sutherland in the front row and CEO Richard Hartman beside her. Wesley walked to the podium in his navy suit, confident and polished. He opened with the Aurora project's success, showing the retention rate improvements, the client satisfaction scores, the revenue impact. All my work, all my numbers. Then he transitioned to his capstone, the proactive prediction model. He showed mock-ups of the expanded algorithm, strategic frameworks for implementation, projected outcomes. The audience was impressed. People were taking notes. Amanda was nodding. He was winning again, stealing from me again, and everyone was celebrating him for it. He finished to strong applause and opened the floor for questions. 3 people asked about methodology. 2 asked about scaling. Then I raised my hand. Amanda called on me. I stood up, professional and calm. Wesley, fascinating presentation. Can you walk us through the technical architecture of the algorithm? Specifically, what coding language did you use and how did you structure the data processing pipeline? His smile faltered for half a second. The technical details are quite complex, but the strategic framework is what matters for this audience. I nodded pleasantly. I understand, but as someone interested in the development process, I'm curious about the foundation. Did you build it in Python? Java? What databases are you querying? He was sweating slightly now. My team handled the technical implementation. I focused on the strategic vision. Amanda interrupted. Actually, I'd like to hear the answer to this question. Understanding the technical foundation helps us evaluate scalability. Wesley stumbled through a vague response about Python and data structures, getting basic terminology wrong. I asked 2 more technical questions. He couldn't answer either one accurately. The room was getting uncomfortable. Then I asked the killer question. When did you first access the algorithm's source code? Wesley blinked. I'm not sure what you mean. I smiled. The algorithm logs every access with timestamps and user credentials. It's standard security protocol, so I'm asking when you first accessed the code to begin development. His face went pale. I don't recall the specific date. I pulled out my tablet. Would you like me to tell you? According to the access logs, you first viewed the completed algorithm on March 14th of this year, but the algorithm was already finished by then, built over 18 months starting September of the previous year, so if you first accessed it after completion, when did you develop it? The room went completely silent. Amanda stood up. I think we need to pause this presentation. Wesley, please come with me. Simone, you too. We walked out of the conference room followed by Patricia, who looked like she'd swallowed glass. The emergency meeting happened in a hotel conference room with Amanda, CEO Richard Hartman, the chief legal officer, Wesley, Patricia, and me. Amanda asked me to present my evidence. I opened my laptop and walked them through everything. The timestamps proving I'd built the algorithm. The access log showing Wesley had never touched the code until it was finished. The emails proving I'd designed the strategy and pilot program. The documentation from 3 other colleagues whose work Wesley had stolen. The testimony from Keisha Williams. 47 pages of irrefutable proof that Wesley Garrett had built his entire career on theft. Wesley tried to argue. Simone did technical work, but I provided the strategic vision that made it valuable. I showed them his emails from the project period. In 18 months, he'd contributed 6 messages, mostly asking when I'd be finished so he could schedule presentations. No strategy, no vision, just opportunistic positioning. Patricia tried to defend him. This is a misunderstanding about collaboration and credit allocation. Amanda cut her off. This is fraud. Wesley presented work he didn't do as his own creation to secure a promotion and development program slot. That's a terminable offense. She turned to Patricia. And you approved this despite having access to the same project documentation Simone just showed us. Why? Patricia's face was red. I evaluated based on leadership potential and strategic thinking. Amanda's voice was ice. You evaluated based on something other than merit, and now this company is exposed to potential legal action from multiple employees whose work was stolen under your supervision. The CEO looked at the chief legal officer, who nodded grimly. We need to conduct a full investigation, immediately. The meeting ended with Wesley and Patricia suspended pending investigation. I was told to return to my hotel room and await further instructions. I walked out of that conference room shaking but upright. The investigation took 3 weeks. Teams from corporate went through every project Wesley had worked on for 4 years. They found 8 instances of clear credit theft from 6 different employees. They found evidence that Patricia had known about at least 4 of them and had either ignored complaints or actively discouraged people from pursuing them. They found that Wesley had been promoted 3 times based on work he hadn't done. The final report was 53 pages long, and it destroyed both of them. Wesley was terminated for cause with no severance. Patricia was offered the choice to resign or be fired. She resigned. The company issued a formal apology to me and the other affected employees. They offered financial settlements to prevent lawsuits. And they offered me Wesley's position in the Senior Leadership Development Program, including the raise, the title, and the executive access he'd stolen. I accepted the position with one condition: that the company implement new policies requiring explicit documentation of individual contributions to all major projects, and that managers be trained to recognize and prevent credit theft. They agreed. The new policies were drafted within 6 weeks. I completed the Leadership Development Program and presented my capstone, the legitimate expanded version of Aurora, to the board of directors 6 months later. It was approved enthusiastically. I was promoted to senior director, the position Wesley had been angling for. I built a team of analysts who actually contributed to projects instead of stealing credit. And every time I walked past the office that had briefly been Wesley's, I remembered the lesson I'd learned. That documentation isn't paranoia. That systems protect the powerful until you force them not to. That sometimes you have to let someone think they've won before you take everything back. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.